Gaza's out of power as Israel prepares a ground offensive. Taiwan's nurses prepare to take to the streets. The EU and Taiwan work to build even stronger business ties. Plus, coral are spawning, even as the threat they face is growing. Hello and good evening. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. I'm Eric Gao. A humanitarian crisis is unfolding in Gaza, currently in a power blackout. Israel is preparing to launch a ground offensive into the territory as they continue airstrikes into the region. Ko Wen-je has the story.
The Gaza Strip spends its first night in darkness as the Seoul power station runs out of fuel. The only thing lighting the sky is a barrage of airstrikes from Israel. In the morning, the devastation is clear.
قالوا لا احنا عندنا 50 نفر في الدار لا في اكل لا في شرب لا في ميه لا في كهرباء كيف بدنا نطعميهم هذول مش فاهم قاعدين بنلقى شويه رز وشويه عدس وشويه مش عارف ايش عشان نطعميهم. Gaza's 2.3 million population is now in the midst of what the United Nations is calling a humanitarian emergency. The Palestinian health minister says more than 600,000 people are deprived of food, water, fuel, and other necessities. And over 300,000 people displaced from homes after Israel ordered a total blockade to the enclave in response to Hamas's surprise attack.
احنا طبعا لا تنظيمات ولا في حاجه هي اجانا الدار ردم هي فوق بعض الدار طبعا هينا مشردين قدرناش نجيب ولا حاجه لقينا الردم فوق بعضه هينا طالعين في شويه هبل هيك من الدار وطالعين فيها.
Talks are underway to allow civilians out of Gaza through Egypt. But Israel is not in a forgiving mood, announcing that gas, electricity and water to Gaza will be cut off until hostages are returned. Israel has formed an emergency government and war cabinet, uniting a divided political scene, who together are vowing to devastate Hamas.
העמידה שלנו כאן, שכם אל שכם, היא מסר ברור לאויבינו, וחשוב מכך, מסר לכל אזרחי ישראל. כולנו יחד, כולנו מתגייסים, כולנו מגויסים.
אנחנו נמחה את הדבר הזה שנקרא חמאס, דאעש עזה, נמחה אותו מעל האדמה. הדבר הזה לא ימשיך להתקיים.
And as leaders of the world continue to condemn the brutality of Hamas.
This attack was a campaign of pure cruelty, not just hate, but pure cruelty against the Jewish people. And I would argue it's the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust.
A senior Hamas political leader has spoken out, denying civilians were targeted in Hamas's onslaught. He said the move was their only option to restore rights to Palestinians, denied by Israel.
All the doors were closed, and this is the thing which will open a door. We know very well that this political solution is the way to achieve all the people in this region their rights, but unfortunately, this is the only door we've been forcibly to knock.
But images from Hamas's ground offensive continue to emerge. The Israeli Defense Force says that over 100 people abducted by Hamas are being kept underground in Gaza. A record 300,000 Israeli troops are now amassing near that border, ready to execute a ground invasion. But the alarm is sounding on Israel's north border with Lebanon. Amid concerns Hezbollah militants are joining the fight. The conflict has shocked the world, and there are divided opinions. Analysts say the Hamas offensive may have achieved the opposite of its purpose.
The events have actually undermined any prospects for a future Palestinian state alongside Israel because the so-called two-state solution require a lot of trust. If that trust has now been shattered, and it has, then what service did that attack do for those who are wanting a Palestinian state?
As leaders on both sides continue to wage war, Gaza is running out of resources, leaving people to search through the rubble to survive another night. Alex Chen and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
Here in Taiwan, nursing unions plan to march through Taipei later this month to demand better pay and conditions. That's amid a nursing shortage they say is making the job unbearable. John Van Trieste reports.
Taiwan's nurses say they're in hell, and nursing union reps are dressed in gaulish costumes to drive the point home. Many of their colleagues are quitting due to low wages and tough conditions. Fresh nursing school graduates aren't making up the difference either. Almost half give up on the profession before they even get their license. All this means overwork, with nurses caring for many patients at once. It means odd schedules that leave no room for proper sleep. And it even means an expectation that nurses will work in departments outside their expertise, doing a bit of everything just to keep hospitals running. The unions have a plan, though.
那我们预计是在10月22号当天中午12点半在这个地方集合。那除了就是有舞台活动之外，我们也会有游行活动。
A hell-themed march through Taipei to draw attention to their plight just as the presidential race enters its final stretch. In a tactic spreading among labor circles, they've invited the candidates to come and publicly endorse their demands.
尊重专业，提升待遇。
Money. As the nurses here see it, that's the root of the shortage. And higher wages take pride of place among their 4 demands. Though with bonuses, a nurse at a big medical center can make $1,800 a month, around Taiwan's average. Some here say pay for most is far lower.
你可以看到他们的底薪就29000、32000，大家觉得这样低不低薪？非常的低薪。
It's not just union members saying low wages are a problem.
在这个过程当中，你要怎么样的去留住人力？其实最重要的一件事情就是要增加我们的薪资。那你只要是增加薪资、增加这样的诱因，男生女生都会来投入。
But it's not just about money. The nurses' unions are also demanding an end to overwork, an end to unreasonable schedules and expectations, and more investment in Taiwan's public health insurance system. They say if they don't get what they're demanding, the march may not be the end of their push.
那至于罢工的话，那就会是如果我们有更多团结的力量，有达到罢工的门槛，当然那也是一条可能的道路。
There's a festive atmosphere here, but behind the fun costumes is a serious issue, a vicious cycle of low wages, quitting nurses, and no one left to take their place. It's something that the nurses here hope the presidential candidates will address for the safety of everyone. John Su and John Van Trieste in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Meanwhile, flight attendants have written a letter to the president demanding more protections against sexual harassment. As Tiffany Wong reports, it's their latest push in Taiwan's Me Too movement.
A welcome card for passengers, or an invitation for unwanted advances. This card is given out to business class passengers flying with one of Taiwan's largest airlines, EVA Air. Flight attendants say the messages are inappropriate and could lead to sexual harassment.
还有人因为拿到这张小卡，然后乘客误以为空服员对他有好感，然后还留下了自己的联络方式，然后说想要跟空服员进一步做朋友。其实，在空服员这边已经受到一些困扰了。
Now, the Flight Attendants Union is calling on the most powerful woman in the country, President Tsai Ing-wen, to do more to protect them from sexualization in the workplace. They're demanding the right to take menstrual leave without being penalized, the right to wear pants instead of skirts, and for sexual harassment cases they experience while abroad to be punished. EVA says the welcome card is meant to improve interactions between flight attendants and passengers, but it will consider the flight attendants' feedback. The letter to the president is the latest in a string of protests from flight attendants. In August, the union protested the skirt requirement. Flight attendants also criticized a major political party for a campaign event which featured dancers dressed as female flight attendants.
这些事情都应该男性、女性一起共同在这里面去加入，然后共同去努力，他才有可能去做一些改变。不往这个方向去做前进，其实事实上来讲，对企业整体的形象也好，对企业的竞争力来讲，也是会有影响的。
Taiwan has seen a greater push for gender equality after a Me Too movement was sparked this summer. The Flight Attendants Union says the airline industry in particular is rife with gender inequality and are calling for President Tsai to stand with them. Eason Chen and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's export orders for September increased 3.4% compared to the year before. That breaks a streak of 12 consecutive months of falling outbound orders. The turnaround was driven by a 60% boost in orders for IT and audiovisual equipment, as many manufacturers released new models last month. Taiwan's imports also fell from a year earlier, leading to a trade surplus. Taiwan's largest export market is China, including Hong Kong. That's followed by ASEAN nations and the United States. Taiwan's business ties with the European Union are strong, but they could be better. That was the main message at an investment forum held in Taipei. This comes as the EU's relations with China have hit a rough patch. Jeremy Olivier has this report.
Business leaders, policymakers, and even President Tsai Ing-wen herself gathered in Taipei for the 2023 EU Investment Forum. Now in its fourth year, the event is sold as a platform to promote Taiwan-EU economic cooperation. This year, the theme was semiconductor and high-tech supply chains.
We are sharing a commitment to building more resilient supply chain capable of withstanding disruptions.
Our economic relations are robust, dynamic, and constantly growing.
Economic relations between Taiwan and the EU have grown stronger in recent years. The bloc is now Taiwan's fourth largest trading partner, with two-way trade reaching $75 billion in 2022. It's also the country's biggest source of foreign investment, accounting for more than 25% of total FDI in Taiwan. But that relationship is somewhat one-sided. Taiwanese investment in the EU is quite small by comparison. Analyst Marcin Jezewski says the forum in Taipei and recent legislation like the European Chips Act, which encourages semiconductor manufacturing investment, are aimed at trying to correct this imbalance.
The relationship is already changing, and we can see that the interest of Taiwanese investors in Europe is growing. And one of the flagship investments is, of course, the planned TSMC chip factory in Dresden, Germany. However, this imbalance is still quite considerable.
And even as the event in Taipei was taking place, EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell arrived in Beijing for his own balancing act, trying to temper Europe's souring relationship with China. Most recently, Brussels launched anti-subsidy probes into China's electric vehicle and steelmaking industries. And while the two may find ways to resolve some of their differences in the short term, the moves could signal a bigger trend.
A part of the risking strategy that the European Union is pursuing vis-à-vis China is diversification, and that includes diversification of the European Union's economic relations and tightening relations with other partners in the Pacific region than China, and that of course includes Taiwan.
The EU's interest in attracting more Taiwanese investment does have its limits, though. In March, Brussels rejected the possibility of a bilateral investment agreement with Taipei, a frustrating end to long-stalled talks on the issue. The EU says conditions for investors in Taiwan are stable, making a formal deal unnecessary. But most believe it wanted to avoid angering China, which sees such agreements as political. Despite the tricky geopolitics, what's clear is that Taiwan and the EU are looking for ways to further cooperation in key industries. Now, whether or not an investment agreement is possible in the near future, there's hope that the two sides can continue working toward a more mutually beneficial relationship. Chris Ma and Jeremy Olivier in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Australian Chinese journalist Sun Lei has reunited with her family in Australia after spending 3 years in detention in China. Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong says her government's consistent advocacy led to Sun's release. She was arrested in August of 2020 on charges of giving away state secrets and was tried in secret in March of 2022. Her arrest came during a time of diplomatic tension between Australia and China. To learn more about Sun Lei's release, TaiwanPlus reporter Bing Wang spoke to Yaqiu Wang from Freedom House.
Why do you think China is letting go of Sun Lei now?
It has a lot to do with the Australian government's consistent and public advocacy for his release. So, the Australian government has been doing this for 3 years, and now she's been released. In Chen Lei's case, I would think it's more a geopolitical issue that, at the time that Australian government called for China's, called the WHO to investigate the origin of COVID. So in her case, she's a victim of geopolitical conflict, and she's just been Australia in China at the wrong time.
According to some reports, there are over 100 journalists detained in China. Why does China frequently arrest journalists?
There are other journalists, many are Chinese, who are detained or imprisoned in China because of what they write, because they speak critically of the Chinese government. At this point, there's no press freedom in China. There's no newspaper that are free. So most of the online journalists, the ones who post on Twitter, on YouTube. One example, I would say Zhang Zhan, she's still been imprisoned for 4 years because she reported she went to Wuhan to report on the COVID at the start of the pandemic. She went there and shot some videos and posted them on YouTube and wanted to tell the world, what was going on in Wuhan. And now she's still in prison. So that's just an example. Then there are other people who say things that, the government considered critical, considered politically sensitive, and they're in prison. And there are a lot of minorities, Tibetan writers, Uyghur writers. They are, in prison or disappeared.
How will this affect Chinese-Australian relations, especially as Australia's Prime Minister Albanese is planning a visit to China?
I don't know to what extent. Probably it's related that her release is related to Albanese's pending visit to China. Maybe that's one of the conditions that were made for his visit. I do think that when she was detained, it was during a time that Australian-China relationship was at a pretty at the bottom. So she was detained for political reasons.
That was Jiachou Wong from Freedom House speaking to our reporter Bing Wong. And coming up after the break, a possible political alliance ahead of Taiwan's presidential elections. Stay tuned and find out.
For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, follow us on social media or download the TaiwanPlus app.
In the face of adversity, the power of truth.
A roadmap for a just and open world, charted by the freest country in Asia.
Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
TaiwanPlus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Turning now to Taiwan politics, there's only a few months left to go until January's presidential election. Candidates for two of the main opposition parties, both trailing in the polls, are now hinting that they might join forces. EVA Ayers has this report.
Defiant chants at a Kuomintang press conference as party heavyweights meet in a display of strength and optimism. Fighting blue is the buzzword of the event, with blue the colour of the main opposition Kuomintang, or KMT. Though he's trailing in the polls, the party's presidential candidate Hou Yu-ih isn't ready to throw in the towel. Instead, he might be looking to team up with Ko Wen-je, candidate from the Taiwan People's Party, whose party colour is white.
那双方面已经取得了联系，我们的所有的议题都是开放的。那先坐下来，两边把所有的相关的议题大家对好。 大家一起朝蓝白合作方向往前走。
But Ke doesn't seem as enthusiastic as his KMT counterpart. Ke has been pushing Hou to participate in public debates and opinion polls, with the winner standing as the presidential candidate for any would-be coalition. It's a request that's yet to be answered.
所以我们希望呢，国民党可以尽快的来回复这个进行的方式哈，那也回应社会的期待。
The subject of cooperation may be at a roadblock until Hou agrees to debates, though current polling suggests that a blue-white coalition may be the best chance both parties have to win this election. The most recent polls show Democratic Progressive Party candidate Lai Ching-te as the frontrunner, with just over 30% of the vote. The Taiwan People's Party's Ko Wen-je sits in second, followed by Kuomintang's Hou Yu-ih. Independent candidate Terry Guo trails with around 11%. A separate poll asked respondents to choose between a Ke and Hou presidency versus Lai and Xiaobi Kim, who many believe will be Lai's pick for running mate. Almost 50% said they'd support a blue-white coalition, beating out current frontrunner Lai by around 12%. Despite the risk of a united front from the opposition, the DPP candidate, current Vice President Lai Ching-te, remains confident that his party will come out on top in January's elections.
未来会安怎变化，咱唔知啊。所以咱一定爱做最好的准备啊。就是讲，无论安怎变化，在野党无论是安怎组合，咱拢要赢安尼。
But with barely 3 months to go until the election, the opposition may still have a few tricks up their sleeve in their bid to unseat the ruling party. Scott Huang and Reese Ayres for TaiwanPlus.
China and Saudi Arabia have launched 3 weeks of joint maritime counter-terrorism exercises. This is the second time that the two countries have held the so-called Blue Sword drills. They're being held in southern China's Guangdong province. It's the latest example of cooperation between Beijing and Riyadh. Earlier this year, China helped broker the landmark restoration of diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran, as Beijing looks to expand its influence in the Middle East. To find out more about the significance of the China-Saudi drills, TaiwanPlus reporter Sam Hui spoke to Ling Yingyu of Taipei University's Institute of International Affairs and Strategic Studies.
Why is China launching this maritime counterterrorism exercise with Saudi Arabia?
我想，其实对解放军来说的话，他会想要在这一边有一些兵力的一个布置。那我们可以去注意到的，就是说，过去沙烏地阿拉伯跟中国在飞弹的购买上面，其实有很多的合作互动关系。那再来的话，还有就是他们也有卖给沙烏地阿拉伯一些高级教练机。所以，如果他在从飞弹、高级教练机以及未来有可能在海上的进行一些军事合作的话，那这样子是有利于中国它对于这个军事军火的一个外销。
What's the importance of this exercise?
我个人会认为这个演习并不能说非常的一个重要，但是它对于中国来说，它是一个打开另外一个窗口。那这种反恐为主的演习的话，通常中国都是先利用这个作为开端，因为毕竟反对恐怖组织、打击海盗这一些是国际普遍认同的一个军事合作。那把这个作为开端，日后再去扩张中国跟沙烏地阿拉伯的一个合作跟影响。
Is China trying to build up its own naval alliance in the Middle East?
就目前来看的话，我个人认为机会还是不大，因为就中东来看的话，目前不管是在阿拉伯海啦，或者是在这些海峡啦，或者是在等等这个部分，其实已经蛮多都是美国的势力。那他现在只能够逐步的去建构他的势力。
Why is this exercise significant to Taiwan's national security?
其实他未来也会希望能够透过去影响沙烏地阿拉伯来控制对台湾的能源，因为毕竟就目前我们中华民国来看的话，我们有很多的一个能源是从沙烏地阿拉伯这边进口的。
That was Ling Yingyu of Taipei University in New Taipei speaking to our reporter Sam Hui. Coral spawning is essential to the preservation of delicate marine ecosystems, but concerns are growing about the threats they face. Sally Jensen has more.
Like clockwork, these corals perform an act that sustains life in the oceans. Coral spawning is a magical phenomenon to observe and happens only once a year under certain conditions.
根据太阳下山跟月亮上升的这个时间点的黑暗的长度跟月光的光亮的亮度来决定它要不要同步产卵。
Spawning brings about a new generation of marine invertebrates. The coral reefs they form provide food and habitat for around a quarter of ocean species. That's why they're often called the rainforests of the sea. But veteran diving instructor Grace says they are no longer as vibrant and abundant as they once were.
我们很常听到在地人就说：“哎呀，你们说现在很漂亮啊，我们30年前更是漂亮，满满的珊瑚，满满的鱼，满满的龙虾。可是现在就不像以前一样。”
She and other marine ecologists say this is partly because of human-caused damage.
如果说游客他不换水性的时候，他常常会就是很自然的、不自觉的，或者站在那个珊瑚上面，它就会造成那个珊瑚的踩踏，珊瑚的上头就会产生像癞痢头一样，就凸了一块在上面。
But it's not just accidental trampling that's causing damage to the coral reefs. There's also overfishing, pollution, habitat destruction, and climate change.
珊瑚礁生态系是第一个会消失在 这个地球上面的生态系。这些岛国的国家的这些人民都是依附在健康的珊瑚礁生存，所以今天要有健康的珊瑚礁，我们人类的生活才有办法健康的活下去。
其实是蛮两难的，就尤其是自己在地的时候，你在看这件事情，所以我们也会蛮纠结的，有怎么样去做才是最好的。
But just as human activity is destroying coral reefs, human intervention may be their only hope of survival. Researchers in Taiwan are trying to artificially spawn these corals. This device collects coral sperm and egg bundles to be taken back to a lab.
珊瑚以软海战术释放中，其实它的存活率很低，人工带回去实验室培养的话，可以大量增加这些珊瑚的存活率。
Coral conservationists hope that in this way they can continue the reproductive cycles of corals and help preserve the world's biggest carbon sink. And if their work can raise awareness about the importance of corals, it may just breed new hope for these delicate ecosystems. Joseph Wu and Sally Jensen for TaiwanPlus.
Thanks for tuning into TaiwanPlus News. You can find more of our news reports on TaiwanPlus.com or on our app. Finally, check out these pieces of work by filmmaker Tim Burton being displayed in Turin in Italy. I'm Eric Gao, and I'll see you tomorrow.
For more stories from here in Manzu and around the world, download the Taiwan Plus app.